You know, when we think about big cyber attacks, our minds usually jump to some super sophisticated hacker, right? Breaching these impossibly complex defenses. But the real story of 2025, it was totally different. It wasn't about the heavily fortified front door. It was about the side entrances, the ones just left wide open. So let's dive into the year's biggest cyber events and find out what or who those weakest links really were.
To really get a sense of the stakes here, we have to start with this number, 190 million. That's how many people might have had their data compromised in just one attack on a subsidiary of United Health. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's more than half the entire population of the United States. It's just a staggering figure, and it perfectly sets the stage for a year that was defined by absolutely massive digital exposure.
Okay, so to make sense of everything that happened, we're going to break it all down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the sheer scale of the problem. Then, we'll trace how these breaches created a massive domino effect. After that, we'll look at the simple, almost silly cracks in the armor that cause so much damage, see what happens when the digital world crashes into the physical one, and finally, check out how the world started to respond.
All right, first up, let's talk about the scale of these breaches. And as we've already hinted, the numbers this year were, well, they were on a whole different level.
And this chart, wow, it really lays it out for you. At the very top, you've got healthcare, with that United Health breach hitting 190 million people. But this wasn't just a healthcare problem. A breach at McDonald's affected 64 million job applicants. And the telecom giant TalkTalk exposed almost 19 million of its customers. The message here was loud and clear. Absolutely no industry was safe.
But the scale wasn't just about single, isolated breaches. In June, a collection of 16 billion with a B login credentials was just dumped online. Now, this didn't come from one hack. It was this giant compilation of data that had been slowly siphoned off infected computers for years. Think of it as a massive stockpile of keys, giving criminals the fuel they need for countless future attacks all over the world. And that idea of one thing leading to another, that brings us right to the core theme of 2025, the domino effect. This is where we really see how one company's mistake can bring a whole bunch of other companies crashing down with it.
Before we get any deeper, let's make sure we're all on the same page with this term, third-party risk. What is it? Well, it's basically the threat that comes from your partners, the software companies you use, the service providers you hire, the contractors you rely on every single day. The bottom line is, if they're not secure, then you're not secure. Simple as that.
The Clop ransomware campaign is just a perfect textbook example of this whole domino thing in action. It all started with one single flaw in a popular piece of file transfer software made by a company called Clio. The Clop gang found it, they exploited it, and then boom! All of a sudden, huge companies like Hertz and Kellogg's are finding their data has been stolen. Not because their own walls were breached, but because a piece of software they trusted was vulnerable.
And this wasn't some one-off thing. This pattern just kept popping up, over and over again, all year long. Wall Street banks got hit through a shared vendor. Air France KLM was exposed because of a customer support partner. The University of Phoenix lost student records through a records management company. DoorDash through yet another third-party service. The lesson was becoming painfully clear. You're only as strong as your supply chain.
Now, you might be thinking this is all about these super complex, interconnected supply chain attacks. But that's not the whole story. Sometimes the cracks in the armor were, well, they were shockingly simple, but the damage they caused was just as bad.
And these failures came in a few different flavors. You had just plain old human error at McDonald's. Get this. A recruitment chatbot holding the data of 64 million applicants was protected by the default password 123456. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Then there's the malicious insider. At Coinbase, criminals didn't even have to hack anything. They just bribed employees at a third-party company to steal user data for them. And for Petco, it was a basic misconfiguration. A folder with sensitive customer files was just left open for anyone online to see. It just goes to show you the biggest threats aren't always the most sophisticated. A lot of the time, they're the ones we just overlook.
Okay, so losing your data is one thing. It's bad, for sure. But in 2025, we saw this terrifying trend where these digital attacks started spilling over into the real world with very real, very physical consequences. This is where things get personal.
Picture this scene. You're at the airport, ready to go on vacation, and suddenly, everything just stops. That's what happened in September. A ransomware attack hit a single passenger processing system, one used by lots of airlines, and it caused absolute chaos at major hubs like London Heathrow and Berlin. Check-in desks went dark. Baggage systems just stopped working. Tens of thousands of travelers were just stranded.
And it didn't stop at airports. A cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover completely crippled their IT systems, so badly, in fact, that they had to shut down production in their factories all around the world. That shutdown lasted for 6 weeks. 6 weeks! That's a massive blow to their entire operation.
So let's just step back and look at what this really means. We're not talking about numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. We're talking about real people stranded at airports, a huge automaker needing a multi-billion-dollar government loan just to survive, and entire cities like Glasgow with their public services completely paralyzed. It was a brutal reminder that our physical world really does run on a digital backbone.
Okay, so with all this chaos, you have to ask, what was the world doing about it? That brings us to our final section, the global response. How did regulators and nations finally start to fight back?
So the response kind of moved on two main fronts. On one hand, you had the rulebook. The European Union rolled out some major regulations like DORA and NIS2, which basically forced companies to get serious about their IT security and their third-party risks. And on the other hand, you had teamwork. The landmark UN Cybercrime Treaty finally opened for signatures, which was a huge step in helping countries actually work together to hunt down these criminals across borders.
But here's the thing. Even as everyone was scrambling to fix the problems of 2025, the world's leaders were already looking over the horizon and seeing the next storm gathering. The G7 issued a special statement warning that the next big wave of risk is going to come from artificial intelligence, and they urged everyone to start preparing for AI-driven cyber threats right now.
You know, when you boil it all down, the entire lesson of 2025 really comes down to this one powerful idea from the Third Party Risk Institute's report. Your security is only as strong as the weakest link in your digital ecosystem. And in 2025, time and time again, that weakest link was a third party.
And that leaves all of us with a really big question, doesn't it? We've seen the incredible damage from today's weak links, the software vendors, the bad passwords, all of it. But as our technology gets even more complex, and our supply chains get even more tangled, and as things like AI get woven into everything we do, what's going to be the weakest link of tomorrow? That's the challenge we all have to think about.